Today's episode of the TribCast is brought to you by Raise Your Hand Texas and One World Strategy Group. Hello and welcome back to the TribCast. I'm Eleanor Klibanoff, women's health reporter here at the Tribune, joined by my co-host, politics reporter James Barragan. How you doing, James?
I'm doing great.
Great. And fan favorite, friend of the pod, politics reporter Jasper Scherer. How you doing?
I'm good. I didn't know I was a fan favorite, but happy to be back.
Everyone's talking about it.
Everyone.
Jasper is standing in today for our co-host, Matthew Watkins, which I believe also gives you all the powers of interim editor-in-chief.
It's fine. It's a big duty, but I take my powers. I don't take them lightly.
Yeah,
so.
Long overdue. People have been saying.
Many people.
Do you have any emergency action items you're going to shove through while you're interim editor-in-chief?
That's a good question. I mean, I've just learned 10 seconds ago that I have this title now, so I haven't put a ton of thought into it, but I am excited to try to, fill Matthew's shoes on the podcast.
Speaking of power, this week's episode is all about the top dog in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott. This week, the governor gave his State of the State address on Sunday, where he laid out the emergency items that the legislature can fast track, sort of his priorities for the session. This speech is also an opportunity for the governor, he's been governor for a decade, to sort of talk about how the state is going under his tutelage, under his leadership. Came at a tricky time this year, I think, for Abbott. Just hours before this speech, Texas experienced a pretty significant tragedy. The Dallas Mavericks traded Luka Doncic to the LA Lakers. I
wasn't sure where you were going with that.
And I just think it's important that we start, I think people put a lot of trust in us here at the Texas Tribune. Who you get your news from matters. I want to go on the record and I want to say to our North Texas listeners, our North Texas fans, I am not now and have never been a Los Angeles Lakers fan. Jasper, have you ever been a Los Angeles Lakers fan?
No, I can't say I have. I can't speak for everyone on the podcast, but personally, no.
Right. So that's 2 of 3. James?
I love the Los Angeles Lakers. I will not apologize for it. And I'm sorry. I mean, I think the Nico Harrison made a bad decision, but it benefits my team. So I am okay with this.
Yeah, I think it's a matter that maybe the House General Investigative Committee should start taking a look at. Just they've been dormant for some number of months now, and I just feel like things look a little fishy here.
To look into what went into the decision?
Yes.
Yeah.
A, what went into the decision. B, James's fandom of the LA
right,
Lakers.
That too.
Yeah. It is a trade that the Ringer referred to as the dumbest NBA move I've ever seen. I think it was the front page of the Dallas Morning News. I mean, I feel like Dallas is mourning. Like, are the Mavs done?
There was a literal funeral situation outside of an American Airlines Center.
Yeah, and I guess some of the more, I think you could call it outlandish speculation, or at least really verging in almost conspiracy theory territory, but maybe not, is that Miriam Adelson, of course, is part of the ownership group that has the majority ownership stake. She wants to legalize casinos, legalize gaming in Texas. Has the prospects for that don't seem awesome with Dan Patrick in charge of the Senate. So the theories out there in the ether are that this could be priming the pump for moving the Mavericks outside of Texas, which I don't know if that's actually in the cards, but I feel like just the ties to the Texas political world here, like there's always some sort of Texas politics connection, and everyone's running rampant with all the speculation right off the bat. So
yeah, it's a trade so bad you have to assume there's some kind of political
ulterior motive.
Yeah, ulterior motive at play. Yeah. James, do you have anything you'd like to say to the people of North Texas?
I've been completely caught off guard by this intro right now, and I feel like it was just to make fun of me.
It was. I told Jasper, I said, please come prepared to talk about the Luka Doncic.
But I think what the listeners are learning is that we are political reporters and not sports reporters. We do not have a whole lot of insight.
We mostly want to
Very true.
Tie this back to the Texas legislature and the odds of gambling legislation, which is terrible.
That's right.
Not the legislation. I just mean that we can ruin anything by making it about the Texas legislature.
Yes, come to parties with us.
Yeah, we're very fun. Anyway, moving on to the real stuff, which is that also on Sunday night, Houston native Beyonce won Album of the Year at the Grammys. Huge night for Texas. I've just learned that a resolution has been filed to honor her. So Texas legislature connections to everything.
Los Angeles native Kendrick Lamar also did pretty well at the Grammy.
How dare you?
I don't
But,
even know what to say to that.
Yeah,
That's-
well, I refuse to engage with that
Yeah.
information. Anyway, let's move on to Governor Abbott and the State of the State address. James, you on Sunday took a break from, I assume, planning a Lakers parade in downtown Dallas to attend the State of the State address. Talk to us a little bit about the event. You know, what the vibe was, what the energy was.
Well, the vibe was celebratory. As listeners may know, this is a tradition, the State of the State address that traditionally had been held at the Capitol in front of a joint legislative session of the House and Senate. But a couple of years ago, Governor Abbott made the decision he was going to take the show on the road. First, he did it during the pandemic, and now he's continued sort of doing that tradition, holding it at businesses to sort of, I think, emphasize his business-friendly attitudes and how Texas is a leader in business. So it was a lot of invited attendees. The number given to us in the press box was 1,100 people there. Members of the House, members of the Senate were there. Speaker Burrows was there. And it was sort of a summary of what the governor believes is going right in the state of Texas. We're leaders in business in the nation, got a lot of top tier research universities, and casting his vision forward for what the state needs to do to continue on that path. And, you know, it's all invited guests. So I saw people saying, "Oh, he's getting a standing ovation." It's like, well, yeah, he's going to get a standing ovation.
Preaching to the
friendly
choir.
audience.
Yeah, it was a friendly audience, but you know, it was a speech that cast Governor Abbott's vision forward, saying, "Here's what we need to do for the next couple of decades for Texas to remain a leader." And some of those things we're going to talk about, like water infrastructure, which seems like nuts and bolts, kind of boring stuff. But then there's also other things like school vouchers that he talked about, and said that was a must-pass item. And then things that weren't emergency items, but that he certainly stressed were things like immigration, further restrictions on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, not just in universities, but in other tax-paying entities. So we'll see what comes of that. And then further restrictions on transgender Texans in public life, which really caught a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, were there any big surprises to you, Jasper, on what got the attention, what didn't?
I don't think so. I mean, one thing that maybe caught my attention rather than any individual item was just how, I guess, broad some of the overall like menu of items was. How there's kind of something for everyone, in the sense that, like what James was talking about, there's, I think everyone in the universe of Texas politics knew that education savings accounts was going to be on the list. Bail reform, the Republican version of bail reform has been, this is a repeat item. So some of the more partisan items, I think, were expected. And then just kind of everything else, I think you could put in the category of bipartisan, the shoring up the water infrastructure, teacher pay. I think it was, I guess, notable in how uncontroversial the agenda was beyond sort of the partisan items that we all knew would be on there.
I think part of that was to sort of project his strength on things like school vouchers, but also to sort of quell this infighting that we have seen in the Texas GOP for many, many years now. He, as Jasper put really well, is putting something out there for everybody. Business-friendly Republicans love it. They love the investment in water infrastructure. They love the career workforce training that is coming. Something that wasn't an emergency item, but that he talked about was investment in nuclear power and nuclear energy. They love all that stuff because it creates a better business atmosphere. And then social conservatives are very, very happy about school vouchers, are very happy about DEI talk, are very happy about the further restrictions on transgender Texans, and about immigration. So something for everybody, and everybody seems, the Republicans that is, seem to be happy with the direction that Abbott is laying out.
You guys mentioned most of these, but just for the sake of totality, the 7 emergency items were cutting property taxes, a generational investment in water infrastructure, increasing teacher pay, vocational training programs, school choice, school vouchers, educational savings accounts, bail reform, and then creating a cybersecurity hub in San Antonio.
Yeah, that one
That one
threw me
surprised
for a loop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
because it's a
just
little boring.
a little boring,
be
a little
fair.
specific, a little
Yeah, but I think it's like a national security thing, but it is kind of boring.
it's a good reminder that like a lot of what the government does is gets no headlines and you know is not that incendiary, but
Yeah.
is important.
Could maybe throw that in the category of things that the business, the Chamber of Commerce Republicans would be happy about too. Yeah.
How does this sort of align with what we're hearing from the House and the Senate on what they want to accomplish this session?
I think it generally lines up pretty closely, especially with, I think the Senate has a more, with Dan Patrick laying out his list of so far 25 top priority bills. I think they have a more formal agenda that we can sort of compare to, and just looking at what the emergency items that Dan Patrick has already listed as his priorities: water infrastructure, property tax cuts, school choice, education savings accounts, and bail reform are all up there in those those low bill numbers. And I think Speaker Burrows also put out a statement listing a few items that where he said basically we're all aligned on passing this stuff. So I think there were maybe some items on Dan Patrick's priority list that were not mentioned by Abbott. You could talk about that, but it did seem to me that Abbott was intentionally, going back to my earlier point about it was kind of striking how little controversial stuff was on here. It feels like that could be kind of an intentional move to let's make sure we can knock out school vouchers, ESAs, and some of these other tricky things like property tax cuts. Took 2 special sessions last year. Let's get those out of the way before we bring up all the stuff that could have nasty floor fights and derail these other items.
Yeah, the speaker's statement that you're referencing said, the speaker's statement that you're referencing said the House, Senate, and Governor Abbott are, quote, clearly aligned. So he and the items that he was mentioning were all items that were emergency items for the governor. So they're trying to project unity. They're trying to project that they're all on the same page and there's not going to be this infighting that we saw. We may be on track to another kumbaya session like we saw in 2019. We'll have to wait and see.
Distant memory. Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see what that relationship between the House and the Senate looks like. But also I'll say, can I just get on like a little rant here?
Please.
7 emergency items.
Mhm.
That's what you call priorities. When you have 7 of them, you can track them and we know easily what the 7 are. 7 even is a little bit big, but Lieutenant Governor has 40.
40.
And that has
Yes.
grown from the original 20 that it was. And I get the idea of like, you've got to do more and more. But when you have 40, like each one gets a little less deprioritized. And the House under Speaker Freeland was going to have 150 of them.
Right.
Now we don't know what it's actually going to be like. Speaker Burrows hasn't put out his statement, but just a little rant about priorities and top. The governor said 7, and he said these are our emergency items, and then he talked about a bunch of other issues. And I think he's covering all his bases,
Right.
but it's just a little pet peeve of mine.
Well, and we should note too that Patrick also made a point to say, even if an item is not included in this top 40 list, doesn't mean that it's not a priority or it's not important. So really, 40 is kind of just the starting point of his. So he's
Yeah, it's like everyone
Yeah.
gets a few. I mean, there's not that many senators, guys.
As a wise woman once said, a friend to all is a friend to none, though. Come on now. I mean, there's just show what your priorities are.
I would say, if I could broaden this out even further, a real issue I have had with the Texas, I've covered several state legislatures. There's too many bills, period. Doesn't matter if they're priorities or not. The Texas legislature files north of 10,000 bills every session. We pass about 1,000 of them. Many of them are the same bill again and again and again. It is insane to me. I just saw a memo. Someone, I think Brad Johnson, tweeted out this memo from the, legislative research,
Council, yeah.
legislative research council that, helps write the bills. Basically, being like, can you please tell us which ones are your priorities so we can prioritize getting those written? How about everyone? Here's my ask to the Texas legislators. When you are sending a memo to them saying these are the priorities, I'd like you to, prioritize these bills of the many that I have asked you to write up, just knock off everything else at the bottom there. Just everyone gets a couple priorities. This is what, according to our politics editor, our now managing editor for Politics and Enterprise, Rebecca Allen, has told me that Louisiana, they meet every year, but every other year there's a limit on how many bills legislators can file. Let's give that a try in Texas.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, I think to be fair,
Jasper's like,
Jasper's like, let's stop talking about
Jasper's
this.
like on a high wire right now. We're burning friends over at the Capitol.
it's a pleasure to be here. No,
This is entrapment.
I will just to be fair to the lieutenant governor, I do think that he has still been pretty intentional about the low bill numbers are still he indicates that those are his utmost priorities. I think he sort of assumes that people know Senate Bill 3, like his THC ban, is going to be top of mind. I think people aren't necessarily equating that in importance to like Senate Bill 39. No offense to whoever files that, but it's so I don't know. I think, and it's also sort of like him flexing his muscles in some way, where he's just amassed this.
Sure.
He's pretty regularly referred to as like the most powerful lieutenant governor in history, and he's like, I'm gonna roll out 40 priority bills and like
Get
you
it
guys
done.
better pass it.
Yeah, but it's not being it's nothing about being unfair, but it's just something that is like more colloquial, very easy. There's the 10 Commandments, there's the 7 Sacraments. You know,
Right.
they make it
Sure.
easy for the
Magic
people to
numbers.
follow. Yeah.
Well, I will say, I mean, there is a risk to doing 7 items when in fact we know that of these 7, a few of them are higher priorities. And certainly you do 40, you get to say at the end, we passed a majority of my priorities. With this, Governor Abbott has thrown a ton of political capital last session and now this session into vouchers. I mean, I think we can really see this as like there's 7 and 1 rises above the rest.
Right.
James, talk to us a little bit about how we got here, Governor Abbott's role in getting vouchers to this point.
Right. And I think you make an excellent point. Like there's 7 of them. It's easier for us to track. Like it's easier for the people to watch. It's also easier to snipe them.
It's a bigger gamble for sure.
100% bigger gamble.
Didn't get his agenda done.
Here's what I'll say. I mean, the governor is at an all-time high in terms of his power, right? He was very involved in the Republican primaries last year. He wiped out 11 of 14 opponents to school vouchers and replaced them with people who say they support it. He's so confident that the day after the election, he says we've got 79 hardcore school voucher supporters. That's more than the 76 that he needs to get passed in the House, which is where the problem was. He's also raised or has $70 million in the bank for an election that's 2 years away. And right now you look around and see who would be crazy enough to challenge Governor Abbott in an election, whether that be in the Republican Party from the right or any Democrat who would want to go up against that gargantuan war chest. He is at his all-time strength, and I think that's what he's projecting in this. It's a bold sort of agenda that he's put out. School vouchers is the number one thing, and he's saying, you guys want to oppose me on anything? I dare you. Look at what just happened to the folks that did that last time around. So I think the legislature has gotten the message and they are on board, and that's why you're seeing so much unity. Not to mention that he has also been very wise with the way he's put the agenda out. He realizes he's got a Republican majority in both chambers, and he sprinkled a little bit of something for everybody. So it's a unifying agenda for Republicans, and he's just super strong. So like there's nobody's going to challenge him. Now the Democrats, they are in real trouble, and there's clear opposition from them to a lot of the agenda, not necessarily the emergency items, but some of the emergency items certainly, including how the teacher pay raise is going to go. But what do you do if you're the Democrats is my question. It's going to be a tough session for them, I think.
Right. I mean, Jasper, Governor Abbott, last session we went to several special sessions on school vouchers. He's thrown his weight behind, in these races. He has come out very clearly as this is the cornerstone of at least, the last couple of years of his, or, most recent few years. How much of his legacy is riding on getting this done this session, from the zenith of his power to, it's a big risk.
Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is a lot. Especially just thinking about he's been in office for such a long tenure, just historically speaking, for governors, and he's generally gotten what he wants from the legislature, but he hasn't, with some exceptions, but he hasn't. I'd be hard pressed to think of like really a legacy defining, you know, item like this that he's put all his weight behind and gotten it through, and we could think 20, 30 years down the line that people will like associate this new law with like his name. So in that sense, this is like potentially what people will remember his governorship for, especially if it comes kind of towards the tail end of it, depending on how many more terms he serves. And I think it's also kind of impressive in some ways, just thinking about how where education savings accounts vouchers were at in those the test votes in the House, going back even just like 4 or 6 years ago. It was pretty overwhelming opposition to get from like in the 20s, the number of votes for vouchers, up to potentially in the 70s is pretty significant. So I don't know. I think it's a lot is riding on it, and kind of like what James is saying, it's kind of his political, like, it's assumed right now that he is at the height of his powers, but if he struggles to get it through, like if they get stuck at 74, 75 votes somehow, it's that'll be a huge black mark on him in some ways, given the expectations that he's set coming into the session.
Right, absolutely. All right, let's take a quick break to read a message from our sponsors. Public schools are at the center of our democracy. Raise Your Hand Texas believes the future prosperity of our state, our economy, communities, and citizenry hinges on the success of every public school, school leader, educator, and child. Learn more at raiseyourhandtexas.org/get-involved. And from One World Strategy Group, Jerry Brooks and her powerhouse team don't just play the game, they change it. Y'all see why. Ranked among the best. Smart strategy, real impact, proven results. James, tell us a little bit more about Greg Abbott as a leader. I mean, he's been a longtime governor, but like you said, not a ton of splashy, in a state of, let's say, firebrand political leaders. He sort of runs a little more quiet.
Right. Yeah. And I think, having spoken to people who have worked for the governor and seen sort of behind the scenes, they've sort of admitted that he has grown into the job. He spent most of his career in the legal field as an attorney, as a judge, as the attorney general, and it's a different role from being in the executive and being working with the legislature. I think if you think back to 2015, you could certainly see a governor who was getting his head on straight about how to work with the legislature, and he was so different from his immediate predecessor, Rick Perry, who was a creature of the legislature and had been in both the House and the Senate and knew how to sort of play the game. I don't think it can be argued that Governor Abbott doesn't know how to play the game now. I think, certainly takes a little bit longer to sort of go out there and say his public position, a public view on a position or on an issue. But once he's made up his mind, he's going full bore on it. And we've seen that with school vouchers, right? It wasn't something that I think people in his circles say he's always been a supporter, but he clearly was not as strong a supporter in 2017 or 2019 or even 2021. It really came last session in 2023 that we saw him going like really, really strongly for this. And, school voucher supporters, they see that and they say this has really sort of changed the dynamic here. He has become a lot stronger. We've also seen it on things like immigration. He is very, very clear on having stricter border enforcement, stricter immigration enforcement, and he's really gone for it. So I think he's grown into this very, very, very strong governor who is willing to do almost unprecedented things like we have seen with the immigration enforcement and this state-led border wall, and then also even in trying to get his agenda through with his involvement in the primaries. He's really become this very, very powerful governor that I think people 10 years ago might not have foreseen. But yeah.
I think it's also interesting to add on to that point about just, he of course went scorched earth in the primaries, but even before that, like during session, and it's been interesting to see him, how he interacts with the legislature as someone who hasn't served there before. He was showing all these hardball tendencies even before it got to election season, where he was went on a veto spree, penalizing lawmakers who didn't get on board with vouchers, or I believe also some of the rationale for that was penalizing them for not getting property tax cuts done in time. Even going back to the 2021 session, when Republicans were trying to pass their voting and election overhaul bill, and they failed to do that during the regular session, and the Democrats fled the state and held up the bill. Abbott went ahead and defunded, used the line item veto to, I guess, defund the legislature. So he's clearly establishing this pattern of like governing and sort of interacting with the legislature. He also, of course, has his allies who, will work with him on sort of, the weedsy stuff and getting what he needs in the budget and all that kind of stuff. But we've also seen a striking number of these kind of high profile clashes involving Abbott and the legislature, where he's not, he's willing to use the sword, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because having spoken with people who worked for the governor as well, like again, they said he wants to have good relationships with the legislature. He doesn't like it when there's that rift between them, right? But to your point, he has shown that if you don't get on board with something that he has clearly said is a priority item, there will be consequences. And we saw the worst version of that for the people who lost in the primaries. But there has been previous ones, like defunding the legislature. And it's something that I think is interesting for us to view as that separation of the legislative branch and the executive branch, because he has grown so strong. I mean, even at the peak of Rick Perry's height, there was that thing where he wanted to require like HPV vaccines, and the legislature overrode it, and they were like, no, we're not going to do that. And that was like the legislature sort of flexing its muscle, saying, no, we are our own independent branch, and we are going to do things our way because we are an equal branch of government. Here, the governor is so popular and so strong, and popular is important because voters really, really like Greg Abbott. And so he is so powerful and so popular and so strong that he sort of has overridden that sort of independence, if you will, of the legislature.
Well, and he's like a voracious like fundraiser, right? I think he has learned, like, he is not the guy who is like making the headlines with like crazy quotes or like getting out there. I mean, he certainly does interviews on Fox News and things like that, but he is not, that's not what he is known for. He's like, I think certainly maybe always knew, but now really seems to have stepped into like this like soft powers, unless you're on the other side of it. But the behind the scenes stuff, he can kind of, unless you're closely watching the Texas legislature, you just kind of know him as like, as Greg Abbott, he's not really, I know this from like reporting a lot of the Attorney General's office. Like, I mean, he really like laid the groundwork for, suing the Obama administration and like suing the, the Texas as this leader in setting policy through the courts, and like, rarely talks about that. I mean, talks about it when it serves him, but now you've got Ken Paxton, who obviously takes a very different PR tack.
I think it's more of a focused power. Like, he has the things that he wants to do, and he certainly, I mean, he goes on Fox News on those things like immigration, and he has obviously gone on a big campaign tour about vouchers, but he doesn't feel the need to like talk about every single thing. He's like, I'm with you guys on these things. Like, I don't need to. He's got his, going back to this, he's got his priorities, items, and he's like, I'm going to focus on these because I know we're on the same page about everything else. I don't need to be talking about it all the time.
I do think, I mean, one area where we have seen, I guess, maybe the limits or I guess one check on Abbott's power is when he runs into any sorts of disagreements with Dan Patrick in the Senate, especially. I'm thinking of the property tax rift, I guess we could call it, at the end of the regular session in 2023, where, I know that the governor and his staff were somewhat involved during the regular session, but they really, a lot of the clashing was between the House and the Senate. And then Abbott sort of comes in, pretty I guess, hot, like at the start of the first special session, saying, here's exactly how we need to do these property tax cuts. And he was on the same page as the House. And Dan Patrick said, no, that's actually not how we're going to do it. We're going to raise the homestead exemption. And Abbott sort of ended up backing off. What ended up passing was more or less what Dan Patrick wanted. So that is one area where I think, part of Abbott's power, I think, also comes from just it is a very powerful alliance when Abbott and Patrick are on the same page, and it just so happens that they, on the vast majority of these items, they are pretty aligned.
Right. These were not emergency items, but as you mentioned, sort of Governor Abbott took the opportunity to mention a couple other things, two of which, immigration and his sort of taking a big swing at what he called the woke agendas in schools, and diversity, equity, inclusion measures, gender and athletics and those sort of things. These are things Texas has already done a lot on that now are getting a lot of airtime nationally because of our new president, Trump. Talk a little bit about, the relationship between Governor Abbott, President Trump, and like Texas's, taking a little bit of a victory lap on some of these issues.
Yeah. Well, I think during the speech, Abbott mentioned how he was saying that he thought like the Trump administration was kind of modeling their approach in some ways off of what Texas was doing. Not sure exactly what, how that's playing out so far. It's so early with the Trump administration's policies that I think even just looking at, how Texas is approaching, trying to be a willing and able partner to, help with the mass deportation efforts and all that. It seems like we don't really know how the how much the state is going to actually spend on border security, or just watching some of the Senate finance hearings lately. It sounds like that could just be like a starting point. Abbott's still trying to get the feds to agree to reimburse Texas for all the billions they've spent on border security, which I think even Joan Huffman, the finance chair in the Senate, was like not saying, I'm not super optimistic about that.
Right.
But
this happens every couple of years that they do this.
Right. But I do think, we are starting to see a little bit more. It is coming into focus a little bit, just how the, Abbott signing these explicit agreements to, basically with the Trump administration to deputize or allow state police to serve as de facto immigration officers as long as they're in coordination of some sort with the feds. That is in a lot of ways getting Texas right back to where it was with Senate Bill 4, what they were trying to do with their big immigration bill before it got put on pause by the courts. So I think we'll just continue to see more details roll out as the Trump administration continues to put in more executive orders and all that. But it's clearly the posture for Texas is like, whatever you guys need from us, let's team up and do as much as we can together, which is striking, really.
I also saw it kind of as a massive flex,
Right. Yeah.
for
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Right.
because he did say, the Trump administration is looking at us as the model. They're doing what we were doing, and it is interesting that it's not a emergency item, because it was an emergency item last session. There were 2 items related to the border last time around, and it's been an emergency item like twice before, like immigration related or border related things. You'll remember sanctuary cities in 2017. But yeah, I just think like it's a massive flex to say we don't really need to. We feel like we have a comfortable partner in the federal government, to all the points that Jasper was saying. But again, I think just because it's not an emergency item for the governor doesn't mean he doesn't care about it. It's one of the things that he cares most about. It's been a defining item of his tenure as governor. And I think that lawmakers are still going to be filing bills. So like, let's make no mistake, immigration is going to continue to be a huge issue in the Texas legislature.
Yeah, I think, to your point, it's like Abbott and state leaders can get done what they want to do on immigration. They can ink these agreements with the Trump administration without having to pass any new legislation. And in the meantime, kind of to the point I was making earlier, I could see why Abbott wouldn't be super eager to have these prolonged and really emotional floor debates over contentious immigration legislation while he's simultaneously trying to get this potentially legacy defining school choice ESA bill through. So I think we have seen some proposed legislation already as far as just expanding the state's role in immigration. I think the Dan Patrick priority bill was requiring local governments, cities to cooperate with federal mass deportation efforts. So that's still coming later in the session, and
the governor announced support for that.
Right,
well.
right, exactly.
Right. And certainly, I mean, I was just looking at some polling before this that, they have the support of the voters on this. The immigration is the number one issue. The Texas Politics Project found 22% of Texas voters think that should be the legislature's top priority, which is not, a majority, but it is the issue that they are, have the most support for, followed by the economy. And then in third place, I don't know, which
Right.
same.
Yeah, I think
relatable.
If there's anything we can, a consistent through line on all the statewide polling, especially from the Texas Politics Project folks over there. I know they've pulled this question for a number of years. It's like, it just feels like it's like an endless appetite. There's no amount that is too much that the legislature can spend. Yeah.
But to your point, if you want to focus your energy on education savings account and vouchers, maybe right now you can say, well, the federal government's got the big swings,
Sure.
and let them catch up to where Texas already is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, Jasper, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the TribCast. James, you as well. We hope the good people of North Texas forgive you for your allegiance.
Shameful.
Shameful. We want to thank you to our sponsors, Raise Your Hand Texas and One World Strategy Group. Our producers are Rob Avila and Chris Svoboda. Our theme music is composed by Rob, and we will see you next week.